In the pale sunlight of an autumn morning, Mrs. Evelyn stepped into the First National Bank branch, a grand building adorned with marble columns and gleaming hardwood floors. The simple cotton dress she wore felt oddly out of place among the tailored suits and sparkling high heels of the elite clientele. At 50, Evelyn carried a quiet grace, her bright eyes shining with calm resolve, yet softened by gentleness. In her hand was a worn canvas bag, holding documents she needed to withdraw a large sum from her family account money she intended to donate to a local charity. Inside the bank, the atmosphere was stifling with busyness. Uniformed employees moved briskly behind the counters, but their eyes seemed constantly appraising the customers. Evelyn stepped up to an open counter and offered a gentle smile to the young teller named Sarah, who was typing tensely at her keyboard. "Good morning," Evelyn said warmly. "I'd like to make a withdrawal from this account." She placed her documents on the counter, including her ID and account information. Sarah glanced at the papers, then looked Evelyn over from head to toe. A brief frown flashed across her face. "Please wait a moment," Sarah said coldly, picking up the documents and disappearing into the back office. Evelyn stood there, feeling the curious stares of other patrons. A man in a gray suit whispered something to the person next to him, and Evelyn caught a faint "doesn't look like" in his sentence. She took a deep breath, keeping the smile on her lips, though unease had begun to rise inside her. Sarah returned with a middle-aged man who introduced himself as Mr. Thompson, the branch manager. He looked at Evelyn with suspicion, handling her documents as though they might be counterfeit. "You're Evelyn, correct?" he asked, drawing out the words, stressing each syllable. "This account has a very large balance." "Can you explain why you need to withdraw such a sum?" Evelyn remained calm. "I'm donating the funds to a charity. This is a family account, and I have full authorization to access it." But before she could say more, Mr. Thompson cut her off. "We'll need additional verification. This account doesn't match the profile of our usual clients." He emphasized the word usual, his gaze drifting pointedly to Evelyn's plain dress. The atmosphere grew tense. Sarah whispered something to Mr. Thompson, who nodded and spoke into a walkie-talkie. 2 large security guards appeared, moving to block Evelyn's path to the exit. "Ma'am, please come with us to clarify a few matters," one of them said stiffly. The crowd of customers began to murmur. Some pulled out their phones to record. Evelyn felt a wave of humiliation rise, but she stood tall, her gaze unwavering. "I've done nothing wrong," she said firmly. "You'll regret treating me like this." But her words were ignored. In full view of dozens of onlookers, one of the guards stepped forward and pulled out a pair of handcuffs. "This is for safety purposes," he said. And in that moment, the cold metal clamped around Evelyn's wrists. The click of the cuffs echoed like a gavel striking down, tightening something deep inside her chest, but her face remained composed, her strength unshaken. The crowd fell silent. The air grew heavy like a storm was about to break. The cold clink of metal cuffs still echoed in Evelyn's mind as she was led down the bank's narrow hallway, flanked closely by 2 security guards. They ushered her into a small, sterile room, bare except for a steel table and 2 chairs facing each other like an interrogation setup. The fluorescent light above cast a harsh glare, highlighting the lines on Evelyn's face, not the kind carved by age, but by years of relentless work raising her son into a man of character and success. She sat down, hands still cuffed, but her gaze didn't waver. "You're making a very big mistake," she said, her voice low but sharp like a blade. Mr. Thompson, the branch manager, entered with Sarah following closely behind. The young teller now looked visibly uneasy. "Mrs. Evelyn, Thompson began, attempting politeness, but suspicion still undercut his tone. We have a responsibility to protect our clients' assets. This account is linked to a major corporation and, frankly, you don't match the typical profile. He paused, his eyes flicking to Evelyn's simple cotton dress, as if that alone was evidence of wrongdoing. Can you explain your relationship to this account? Or is this some kind of misunderstanding? Evelyn offered a faint smile, but her eyes were ice cold. I already told you it's a family account. I'm listed on it, and I have every right to withdraw money. You have no authority to treat me like a criminal. She kept her voice even, but anger simmered beneath the surface. She thought of the nights spent scrubbing office floors, the overtime, the exhaustion, the sacrifices she made to put her son through college. And now, the very simplicity she had embraced was being used against her. Behind Thompson, Sarah whispered, "Sir, I checked. This account is tied to Carter Enterprises. Maybe we should call someone in charge." But Thompson waved her off. "No need. If there's an issue, we'll involve law enforcement." He turned back to Evelyn, tone hardening. "You have 3 minutes to provide valid proof. Otherwise, we're handing this over to the authorities." Out in the hallway, a crowd of customers had gathered. The murmurs grew louder. Some were filming, their captions already appearing online. Bank puts woman in handcuffs without cause. A few spoke up in Evelyn's defense, demanding she be released. But security quickly blocked them. "This is an internal matter," one guard snapped. The tension inside the bank felt suffocating, like the whole building was holding its breath. Then the interrogation room door swung open, and the sharp rhythm of dress shoes echoed on the hardwood floor. A man in his early 30s stepped in, wearing a custom-fitted black suit and polished shoes that gleamed under the lights. His features were sharp, his presence commanding, but the moment his eyes fell on his mother in handcuffs, fire flared behind his gaze. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice calm but cutting through the room like a blade. Thompson turned, his face draining of color. "Mr. Carter," he stammered. Sarah froze, her hands trembling as she dropped the folder she was holding. The man, Michael Carter, president of Carter Enterprises and owner of the First National Bank chain, walked swiftly to his mother's side. "Uncuff my mother. Now," he said, each word striking like a hammer against Thompson's pride. The guards fumbled with the cuffs, mumbling apologies as they freed Evelyn. She rubbed her wrists, stood tall, her gaze still fierce, but now laced with a quiet pride as she looked at her son. Michael turned to Thompson, his voice cold. "My mother, who gave up everything so I could have this life, was treated like a criminal because of her clothes. Who exactly do you think you are?" Silence blanketed the room. Outside, the crowd stirred again, now recognizing Michael. The whispers turned to gasps. Phones kept recording as Thompson stood frozen, sweat beading on his forehead. Evelyn placed a hand gently on her son's shoulder. "That's enough, Michael," she said softly. "They'll learn their lesson." But her eyes said clearly, "This isn't over." The interrogation room felt suffocating under the cold stare of Michael Carter. Branch manager Mr. Thompson stood frozen, struggling to stammer out an apology. "Mr. Carter, we didn't know." "This was just a misunderstanding," he said shakily, sweat trickling down his temple. Sarah, the young employee, kept her head bowed, fingers interlocked tightly to steady her trembling hands. But Evelyn, now freed from the cuffs, stood calmly with her arms crossed, her gaze steady and commanding. She didn't need a rushed apology to affirm her worth. She had weathered far worse sleepless nights working late shifts, opportunities denied because of her skin color or background, and she knew her strength had never come from how others saw her. Michael stepped closer to Mr. Thompson, his gaze like steel. Misunderstanding, he repeated, voice low and sharp. You handcuffed my mother, dragged her in here like a criminal. Why? Because she wasn't wearing an expensive suit or carrying a luxury handbag. You call that a misunderstanding? He turned to face the crowd still gathered in the hallway, some still filming, some looking away in shame. And all of you, he continued, his voice rising, stood by and watched while my mother was humiliated. You recorded, but you didn't speak up. Is this what justice looks like? Is this the society we're building? Evelyn laid a hand gently on her son's shoulder, her voice soft yet resolute. Michael, that's enough. She turned to Mr. Thompson and looked him in the eye. I don't want your apology. What I want is change. You all need to learn to see people not by their clothes, not by their skin, but by their dignity and their story. Her words cut through the awkward silence like a blade. She remembered a distant moment standing in line as a single mother at the welfare office, being looked at by staff as if she didn't deserve help. Today, she was standing not just for herself, but for everyone who'd ever been judged by appearances. Michael nodded, though the fire in his eyes hadn't dimmed. I'll make sure this doesn't end here, he declared. I'm launching a full internal review of this branch. Everyone involved in mistreating my mother will be held accountable. And more than that, we're making this public, so no one else ever has to go through what she did. He pulled out his phone and called Carter Enterprises' communications team, instructing them to prepare a press release immediately. I want the world to know there's no place for prejudice in our system. Outside, the crowd began to applaud. Some even shouted in support. An elderly woman who had watched the entire incident stepped forward and gently took Evelyn's hand. I'm so sorry I didn't speak up earlier, she said, her eyes glistening. You're an incredibly strong woman. Evelyn smiled and gave her hand a firm squeeze. Thank you, she replied, but words aren't enough. What we need now is action. Others came forward, some offering apologies, others expressing admiration. The video of the incident, now spreading rapidly on social media, gained thousands of shares, sparking outrage over discrimination and calls for systemic reform. As Evelyn and Michael stepped out of the bank, the autumn sun poured down on them like the world itself was recognizing their quiet victory. Michael walked beside his mother, eyes full of pride. I'm sorry you had to go through that, he said, his voice heavy. Evelyn shook her head and took his hand. You don't need to apologize. I raised you to understand that a person's worth isn't defined by what others think, but by how they face adversity. Today, I just lived that truth. In the weeks that followed, the incident became a national headline. Carter Enterprises announced a comprehensive training program on bias awareness and equity across its entire banking network. Mr. Thompson was suspended. Sarah, though not fired, was required to complete a professional ethics course. A scholarship fund was established in Evelyn's name supporting children from underserved communities, just as she had always dreamed. Her story spread like wildfire, inspiring thousands with its message of quiet strength and unshakable dignity. Evelyn, as always, returned to her simple life. She still wore her cotton dresses. She still walked to the local charity to deliver the money she had intended to withdraw that day. But now, every step she took carried a new kind of power, the power of a woman who had turned injustice into a spark for transformation. And as she walked down her familiar street under the golden sunlight, Evelyn smiled not for recognition, but because she knew no matter how the world tried to diminish her, she had stood tall, and her story would continue to lift others.